A booth in the Bronx, 1972. Lewis's restaurant on East Tremont Avenue, a small Italian place with red checkered tablecloths and the smell of veal hanging in the air. A young man slides into the booth across from two killers, and without thinking, he takes the seat facing the door. The gun is taped behind the toilet down the narrow back hallway. The audience does not yet know he will use it. That single choice of seat is not just staging, it is a rule. Michael Corleone breaks it once in the entire trilogy. When he breaks it, someone always dies. You remember the scene. Sollozzo speaks Sicilian across the table, his voice low and careful, while Captain McCluskey eats veal beside him, with the indifference of a man who has never once feared the door behind him. The train screeches outside the window, that long metal sound that director Francis Ford Coppola layered in later to push the audience into Michael's head. Anyone who has watched the film remembers this scene. It is the moment a quiet war hero becomes something else. It is the moment a son becomes the kind of man his father had spent a lifetime trying to keep him from being. And for more than 50 years, viewers have watched it as a piece of cinema. What most of them never knew is that the actor sitting in that booth was almost not in the film at all. The week leading up to that shoot was one of the most uncertain weeks of Al Pacino's life. Paramount executives wanted him out. Robert Evans, the studio's production chief, and Stanley Jaffe, the company's president, had been campaigning for weeks to replace him. They thought Pacino was too short, too slight, too internal. They had watched the early footage and concluded he was sleepwalking through the role. There were memos, there were phone calls, there were names being thrown around as replacements, including Robert Redford and Ryan O'Neal and several others depending on which account you read. Coppola was fighting for his own job almost as much as he was fighting for Pacino's. He had been hired reluctantly, he was over budget, he was behind schedule, and the studio was looking for any reason to take the picture away from him. So Coppola made a decision. He moved the Lewis's restaurant scene up on the schedule. He wanted Paramount to see what Pacino could do when the character finally pulled the trigger. Pacino has spoken about this in interviews and in his 2024 memoir. He knew he was being watched by men who wanted him gone. He chose stillness as a defense. He stopped trying to perform. He let the camera find him instead of reaching for it. The seat facing the door became a posture of survival, not just character. Viewers remember the scene as Michael's transformation. It was also Pacino's audition for his own job, shot weeks into principal photography. The pull of the trigger that saved the Corleone family from Sollozzo's plot also saved the actor playing him. But the seat itself, facing the door with the back to the wall, was not Pacino's invention. Somebody told him to sit that way, and that somebody had a reason older than the film. Picture the Corleone compound, the wedding in the garden, the black cars parked along the drive, the consigliere whispering at Vito's ear while a singer's voice drifts from the bandstand. Every frame of that opening sequence was shaped by people who understood the world being depicted in a way the screenwriters could not match on their own. The Godfather had real consultants on set. Some of them were named, some of them were not. The most public of them was Gianni Russo, who played Carlo Rizzi, and who has spent the decades since claiming, in books and television interviews, that he had connections to the Colombo crime family during the shoot. His claims are self-reported and frequently disputed by journalists. But what is not disputed is that consultants were present. Mario Puzo, who wrote the novel and co-wrote the screenplay, drew on relationships and years of casual research that gave the world of the film its texture. And one of the things that texture included was the seating rule. The rule itself is older than the film. It is older than Puzo's novel. It is a documented survival behavior, the kind of thing FBI surveillance transcripts caught again and again in the 1960s and 1970s. The kind of thing Selwyn Robb cataloged in his exhaustive history of the five families. Men who lived under the threat of being killed by someone walking through a door learned, very young, to sit where they could see the door. They did not turn their backs to entrances. They did not sit in the middle of rooms. They chose corners. They chose booths. They chose the seat that gave them the longest possible warning, the half-second of recognition that might be the only warning they ever got. The rule was so basic that men in that world did not even think about it. They just did it. Pacino absorbed this lesson so completely that, by his own later admission in interviews, he kept doing it off-camera too. He sat that way in restaurants for years after filming Wrapped. He has described it as something that became automatic, the way a habit becomes the body's memory rather than the mind's. The viewer thinks they are watching acting. They are watching a survival rule, taught by men who lived under it, performed by an actor who could not stop performing it once he had learned. And the rule does more than keep Michael alive on screen. It tells the audience, scene by scene, exactly who he is becoming. It does this without a single line of dialogue, without a flashback, without a voiceover. It happens in the body. But none of that would have mattered if Gordon Willis had lost his fight with the studio. Willis was the cinematographer. The crew called him the Prince of Darkness. He lit the Godfather so that the actor's eyes were often invisible. Vito sits behind his desk in shadow so deep that Marlon Brando's eyes vanish into the bone of his face, leaving only the heavy jaw and the slow movement of the mouth. Michael, in his moments of decision, is lit the same way. Willis did this on purpose. He wanted the audience to read posture instead of expression. He wanted the human body to do the work the human face usually does in cinema. He believed, against decades of Hollywood practice, that withholding the face made the body louder. And the body that did the most work in The Godfather was Pacino's, sitting at tables, scanning rooms, choosing chairs. When Michael sits facing the door, he is in control. When his back is to it, he is vulnerable. The viewer feels this without ever being told. The whole visual grammar of the film rests on it. Paramount hated the darkness. The studio sent memos demanding the film be reshot brighter. Executives looked at the early footage and saw what they thought was a technical mistake, an underexposed disaster that would be unwatchable in theaters. They believed audiences would not be able to see the actors. They were nearly right in terms of how the industry usually worked. The standard practice at the time was to light a leading man so that every twitch of his face could be read from the back row of a movie palace. Willis refused. He stood his ground in screening rooms and late-night phone calls. Coppola backed him every time, and Coppola almost lost the picture more than once over it. The number of times he was nearly fired is debated among biographers. The fact that he was nearly fired is not. The look of The Godfather, the look every viewer remembers, was nearly destroyed by the studio that paid for it. The seating rule would have meant nothing if the lighting had been corrected, because viewers would have been watching faces instead of bodies. They would not have noticed where anyone was sitting. Willis won the fight by refusing to back down, and by the time the first cut was screened for the executives who had been ready to fire everyone, the studio understood it had something different on its hands. The same darkness they had tried to eliminate was the thing that made the picture feel like a different kind of film. Coppola then took the rule further in Part 2. He used it to show a man who had won everything and lost everything in the same frame, often without moving him from his chair. Lake Tahoe. The boathouse. Fredo sitting in a small boat with a rosary in his hands. The cold blue lighting that replaces the warm Sicilian gold of the first film. By Part 2, Michael has built an empire and is presiding over its slow destruction. He is the most powerful man in any room he enters, and he is also a man who has begun to understand that power did not save anyone he loved. He has not saved his wife. He has not saved his brother. He will not save his marriage. Watch the scenes in the Tahoe study. Michael sits with his back to large windows. He turns chairs at angles that would have been unthinkable in the first film. He receives visitors with the kind of openness a war hero would, not the kind of caution a Don should. Coppola has confirmed in commentary tracks that this was deliberate. Michael has stopped protecting himself because he has stopped caring whether he lives. Pacino, by his own account, struggled with this period of the character. He was exhausted by the back-to-back shoots, in open conflict with Coppola over the script during certain sequences, and physically depleted by the time the Lake Tahoe interiors were filmed. He has described stretches of the shoot in his memoir as a kind of professional fog, the feeling of being too tired to act, and discovering, almost by accident, that the exhaustion was right for the part. The stillness on screen was not performance choice alone. It was burnout shaped into character. The hollow expression in the boathouse scene with Fredo, the way Michael barely raises his voice, the way he sits there, looking at his own brother, with the calm of a man who has run out of feeling. The man who taught himself to face the door is now turning his back to it on purpose, and the man playing him was running on empty while doing it. Two stories, the characters and the actors, collapsed into the same body. Viewers remember Part 2 as Michael's coldest, most controlled moment. The frozen Tahoe Lake, the shuttered house at the end, the image of Michael sitting alone in the cold blue dark while everything he built finishes falling apart around him. It is also the moment he stops following the survival rule. The chairs angle wrong, the windows are behind him, the doors are not always in his line of sight. He is not waiting for an attack anymore, he is waiting for an ending. But the moment the rule breaks completely is not in Part 2. It is in a scene most viewers have forgotten, in a film most viewers remember only for its problems. The Godfather, Part 3, 1990. The Italian restaurant scene where Joey Zasa's people are circling. The helicopter conference earlier in the film. the meeting of bosses at the top of a hotel, where Michael sits exposed in glass and steel, completely visible to anyone with a view of the building. The long sequence in which Michael, older now, diabetic, breathing harder than he used to, sits in a public room with his back partially exposed. It is the first time in 3 films that he allows this in a setting where he does not control every entrance. Coppola has described this in interviews as the visual marker that Michael has lost his instinct. The diabetic collapse later in the film, the famous moment when Michael falls to the ground in his study while reaching for his medication, is foreshadowed by this seating change. The body that knew, for 2 films, exactly where to sit, has forgotten. The fall does not come out of nowhere. It has been written into his posture since the helicopter scene. Part 3 is one of the most debated films in the trilogy, and you have to be careful with it. The production was rushed. Winona Ryder was originally cast as Michael's daughter Mary, and dropped out days before shooting was scheduled to begin, citing exhaustion. Sofia Coppola, the director's daughter, was cast as her replacement on extremely short notice. Fans and critics have argued about that decision ever since. Pacino later said the film was made under conditions no one would choose. The script was being rewritten as scenes were being shot. The schedule was unforgiving. The expectations were impossible. All of this is documented and on the record. What matters here is that, inside that troubled production, Pacino aged Michael through posture rather than makeup, the slumping of the shoulders, the angle of the chair, the way he no longer scanned the room before sitting. Eli Wallach plays Don Altobello with the warmth of a family friend and the calculation of a man who has come to kill him. And Michael does not see it coming the way the Michael of 1972 would have seen it coming. The famous final shot of Michael alone in the courtyard of the Sicilian villa, the orange falling from his hand, is what most viewers remember as the moment he loses everything. The image is unforgettable. It is also misleading. He did not lose everything in that courtyard. He lost it earlier. He lost it the moment he stopped watching the door. The courtyard is just where the body finally caught up with the loss, and the men who taught him to watch the door in the first place had stories of their own. The press photos from 1972 are easy to find. Pacino on the cover of Life magazine, his eyes shadowed in the same way Willis shadowed them on screen. The photographer borrowing the look the film had invented. Coppola at the Academy Awards holding the statue for Best Adapted Screenplay. The cast at the New York premiere, smiling, alive, young, the whole world of the picture still ahead of them. What the photos do not show is the row of consultants and minor on-set figures whose names did not make the call sheet. Some of them have spoken publicly in the decades since. Gianni Russo published a memoir in 2019 in which he alternated between confirming and dramatizing his role on the set, and journalists have been arguing with his version of events ever since. Some claims he has made about his connections to organized crime have been challenged in print by reporters who have spent careers covering the same families. Other claims have been left alone, neither confirmed nor refuted. Other advisors stayed anonymous and were never named publicly. Some of them are dead now, some of them never wanted credit and did not appear at premieres or in promotional photographs. The relationships between the film and the actual world it depicted were complicated and sometimes uncomfortable. There were negotiations during pre-production with figures from the Italian-American community who had concerns about how the film would portray them, and the word mafia was famously absent from the screenplay as a result of those negotiations. The film exists in the form it exists in, partly because real people, some of them with real reputations to protect, had real conversations with the people making it. The people who shaped one of the most watched performances in American cinema were largely uncredited. Pacino won the role and rode the film into a career that has now lasted more than 5 decades. Coppola won the Oscar and went on to make Apocalypse Now, sometimes with money he was still earning from Godfather syndication on television. The men in the background who taught the survival rules went home to lives the audience never saw, lives that did not always end well, lives that the public version of the film's history has never fully accounted for. Viewers think The Godfather is Pacino's film, and in a sense, it is. But it is also, quietly, a record of behaviors taught by men who were not allowed in the credits, behaviors that turned out to be more durable than anyone involved could have predicted. Which leaves one last question, the question that has followed Pacino through every decade since. Does he still sit that way? He is 86 now. He spent much of the recent past on a press tour for his memoir, Sonny Boy, sitting across from interviewers in hotel rooms and television studios. The voice rougher than it used to be, the face still recognizably the face of the man in the Louise's restaurant booth. In interviews from 2022 onward, around the 50th anniversary of the first film, Pacino has been asked over and over about Michael. He has said the character never fully left him. He has described, in his own words, a habit of choosing his seat in restaurants. He has not made a performance of it. He has not turned it into a story for the cameras. He has simply mentioned it, in the quiet way older actors mention these things. The rule that began as a survival behavior on a 1971 set, taught by men whose names did not appear on the call sheet, became a habit that outlived almost everyone involved. Gordon Willis died in 2014. James Caan died in 2022. Marlon Brando died in 2004. Coppola is in his 80s. The studios that fought over the lighting have changed hands so many times, the original memos are buried in archives no one will ever read again. The Lewis's restaurant building on East Tremont Avenue has been other things in the years since, and is now something else again. A small piece of New York real estate that the people walking past it every day do not recognize as the place where Michael Corleone became Michael Corleone. The rule remains. Michael Corleone always sat facing the door because someone real, someone whose name most viewers will never know, taught him to. And the actor who learned the lesson is still, more than 5 decades later, watching the door. Picture him at a table somewhere in New York or Los Angeles, on an ordinary night. His back is to the wall, the door is in front of him. He orders quietly. The waiter does not know what he is looking at. Most of the room does not know either. A few people might glance over and recognize the face from somewhere, from a poster on a wall in their 20s, from a late-night cable showing on AMC, from a VHS box their father owned, from the way the music starts when an orange rolls across a wooden floor. The character outlived the film, and the rule outlived the men who taught it. And somewhere in a city that no longer looks the way it looked in 1972, an old man sits where he can see who is coming in.